And so it was just me, my older sister, and my dad. So there wasn't a lot of breathing room for what do you think? It was more, this is what you do. To be fair, and this connects to something Shania said, independence was very important. So I know how to be independent, but I'm going to caveat that. When I listen to people talk about it now, okay? So I listen to a lot of these spaces where people talk about independence, and I think there's an over-exaggeration of how important it is. And roll with me for a second.
Okay.
It's not that I don't think being independent is important. I think people kind of label it as you're doing something extraordinary. And what I think is that's the baseline.
Right.
Like, it's not something to be celebrated. You should be able, if you're a healthy, functioning adult, to take care of yourself.
Right.
You should be able to feed yourself. You should be able to manage your bills and your responsibilities. That's not something to put your hand up and say, I'm special. No, you're the norm, right?
Yeah.
And this isn't targeted to anybody. I mean, this is men and women. You're not special, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That was the norm because that's what I learned very young. And I think just for any person out there, that should be the bare minimum expectation for adults, right? That's what separates us from kids.
Of course.
Because we have responsibilities. We understand there's consequences to our actions. And if we don't know that, we're going to learn it through making those choices and learning through that experience. But I think there's like an over exaggeration of how important that is. And people identify with it to such a degree. This is kind of, I'm slightly dipping into romantic relationships now, where it creates friction when you're trying to build a relationship with somebody. Because it becomes about, and I'm not saying this is everybody. It can become about this question that I think a lot of people are talking about now, particularly in social media, like, do I need you? Do I even want you around?
Oh,
and I don't, and me being me, I'm like, I don't even like that question.
Me,
like,
yeah.
I would reframe that question. No, it's okay. No. Listen, this is you all's space. We're gonna get into it in a little bit. I don't like that question in term. That's why I did the whole premise about independence. To me, if you understand you're supposed to be independent, then that's not nothing to be celebrated. However, when you get a little older, this isn't necessarily aimed at you all. This could be for the audience out here. When you get a little older, you start to understand that life is quite difficult. Okay? If the pandemic didn't teach anybody that, I don't know where you were. But life is very difficult. I would submit to you two and to the audience listening, there's a reason why we're meant to be with somebody. Not a soulmate, somebody. I believe you can build with a lot of people. There's not one person out there for you. There's a lot of people you could make it work with. It's a question of, do you both want to? But my point is, you want to build with somebody. If you want to have children, you want to raise them with somebody dependable and reliable, and that you choose each other because it is easier. So the question of, do I need you? To me, the reason why I don't like that question is, of course you don't. We've already established that you're independent. I don't need you.
Right.
You don't need me. Clearly, you've gotten to this point 26, 25.
26.
Sorry.
27, 26.
Sorry, I'm sorry. 27, 26.
Yeah.
You've gotten 27 and 26 years already. You don't need me. So why is that even the question? But the better question is, would it be better for me to go through life with somebody like you? Because we can complement each other. We can build on things with each other. Your strengths might be my weaknesses, and that's okay, because that's how we learn how to work with each other, particularly, again, if you're talking about family building. So but that type of rhetoric to me is what is helping us to be opposition to each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm not saying you all agree with anything that I just said, but that's how I've been interpreting a lot of the talking points that I hear people talk about on any of these platforms, and it bothers me. Because I deal with the people who end up separating. I deal with the kids who have to go through that experience, and then they're struggling internally because they have to watch their parents snipe at each other and disrespect each other. And then they're setting tones for them on how they may end up engaging in relationships with other people.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Of course.
Any thoughts on that before I continue?
I
Whoever.
mean, I have all the thoughts.
I know, me too.
Oh man. I agree. I worked professionally in social media. I still kind of do. And I spend a lot of time online as a byproduct of that. And I do think there is like this weird narrative going on that like if this person is not an ideal fit, you can't engage in like meaningful relationships with them.
Okay.
And to a certain extent, that's probably true, right? Like you have to, I think, at least agree on like your minimum values and your,
Oh, absolutely.
you know, your day-to-day behaviors, right? Especially if you plan on cohabitating at any point.
Absolutely.
And but I do think the narrative of like, do I need you, is inherently harmful. And I actually think it's more harmful for women than it is for men, because this is something I struggle with as like I consider myself a successful person. I consider myself an ambitious person. And in that, I have felt that I recently went through a breakup, and my first reaction was to call my dad. And I was like, Pa, this is happening right now. I don't really know how to process it. But sometimes I think I'm too much. Like maybe I need to be less. And my dad's reaction, I will never forget. He just paused and he's like, don't ever repeat that to me again. Because he's like, it's not that you are too successful or you're too independent or you're too whatever for men. It's simply the fact that they can't meet you where you are. You know, and I think that is where the necessity thing, people get that confused, right? They get it confused in terms of like a transactional relationship. Like if I can have a house, you can have a house. If I can have a car, you can have a car. And if you don't meet those basic things that I'm doing, you suck and you are not worthy. In reality, there's so many socioeconomic factors that feed into those differences between individuals. You know, and it's not fair to hold someone who may have grown up in like a very affluent household with access to certain financial literacy resources to like a partner who maybe grew up on food stamps
or
impoverished, you know? So it is very like, and I didn't grow up affluent at all, I'd say. So my understanding of like my financial literacy, a lot of it is self-taught. A lot of it I've learned alongside my parents. You know, I became a homeowner at 24 and I didn't have familial support. You know, my sister was my real estate agent. Thanks. But, you know, it wasn't like.
That's some good resources.
Yeah, there, right? Yeah, of course, right? She knew the system. But, you know, at the end of the day, like my parents became homeowners again very close to the time I became a homeowner for the first time. And that, if that is not an example of like having access to resources that put you on a different level, you know, because I get a lot of comments from people my age, like, I can't believe you own a house. You know, how did you do that? And I'm like, there's so many factors that feed into that, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I would never approach a partner like, if you are not a homeowner, you are not worthy. And I think that is a lot of the social media, like, if I'm doing it, you're doing it, and that's how we're equal. Equality and equity are two very separate concepts. And I hate that question. I think it's more, I think when you're a minimum level of functioning as an adult, it's less about do I need you and more do I want you.
Yeah.
And the want to me is so much more powerful than the need.
It is.
Because there's so much autonomy in picking who you're with.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think that, if anything, I think that makes relationships more beautiful, right? When you're actively choosing each other.
Mm-hmm.
Right there. Wait, say that again.
What, if anything?
The last part.
When you're actively choosing each other.
Correct. To me, that's the sole reason why we're in relationships. Remember, relationships are voluntary. We don't have to be there unless hopefully nobody's, you know, threatening you to be with somebody.
Right.
Because that's not healthy. But no, I love what you said. I think for a lot of us, that's where we get things kind of misconstrued. And then we're sometimes, I think we're setting, I don't want to say unrealistic expectations, but I just think they don't match the things that maybe are most important when you're trying to select a person. To go back to your point about, like, do you have to be a homeowner or not? Like, none of those things are really relevant in the context of, like, do I want to build a relationship, a solid relationship with this person? I'm going to start by getting to know them, learning a lot of their upbringing. So there may be some things that I had access to that they didn't. So that fundamentally would mean we're not operating on the same starting point.